Crime Curious is a true crime podcast that takes an in-depth look into real cases through the lens of a trained investigator and former prosecutor turned judge.
If you are sensitive to expletives, anatomical descriptions, and accurate descriptions of crime scenes, this podcast may not be suitable for you.
Are you in need of a private investigator with decades of experience? Crime Curious has teamed up with Corbett Investigations, a top private investigation practice in the greater Indiana area and beyond. Corbett Investigations is run by a former homicide commander of one of the country's most successful homicide units and has put over 400 people in prison for homicide, handled over 1,100 death investigations, and solved 33 cold case murders. Tim Corbett has a whole team behind his services that help him to be successful. They specialize in services like bloodstain analysis, ballistic crime scene reconstruction, and forensic pathology, just to name a few. When you contact Corbett Investigations, you talk with Tim Corbett directly. He is hands-on with every case and can travel anywhere that is needed to get the job done. Corbett Investigations prides itself on honesty, truth, and feet-to-the-ground investigation work and the strength to stand up to whatever is in the way of solving the crime. Corbett Investigations specializes in complex homicide cases, sex offenses, and criminal investigations, old or new. Tim and his team have a reputation for finding witnesses and information that others could not. Contact Corbett Investigations for a free consultation today at 574-229-8115. That's 574-229-8115. You can also check them out on Facebook at Corbett Investigation Services, Inc. Now, on to the show. Welcome to Crime Curious. I'm Charnel.
I'm Megan.
Let's shake all of our good luck gree-gree that we've got going here. Good. Okay, Megan,
Yes.
Would you like to introduce what we're doing today?
So I am going to shake things up a bit, and I'm going to do more of an informative podcast today. If we don't have a case, I'm going to talk to you about family violence.
You do talk about a case, though.
Yeah. Well, I can pretty much, you and I both could talk about multiple cases. And one of the things that brought this on, so I think recently, one of our previous general audience episodes, we had a survivor come on and talk about domestic violence, and specifically it evolved into family violence.
And generational violence.
Yes, which we're going to talk about today. But the reason that this comes up is that I recently, at a charity event for child abuse prevention and awareness, gave a talk at that ball on family violence. And we had a number of listeners who are local and even some who are not ask if there was a way for them to get a copy of that or to be able to listen. And it wasn't recorded, other than a few clips here and there from my daughter, which are very funny clips. If anybody wants to see those, I should actually post a couple. So I decided, upon request, that this would be a presentation that I could give. And the goal of this being, y'all, that while I'm providing some information, it's really, think of this as a call to action and about how we respond to family violence in our communities and what we can do. And we're going to talk about that more extensively as well. So with that being said, do you want me to jump right in?
I do.
Okay. So the title of this talk is, my TED Talk today, is a brief introduction into the what, why, and how of violence in the home. So family violence, to start with, it's going to be any form of abuse, mistreatment, or neglect that a child or adult, so any member of the home, experiences from a family member or from someone with whom they have had an intimate relationship. So note, I'm not just pigeonholing people who are involved in domestic violence. This could be anybody who's in your home. The use of violence itself, which is self-explanatory, threats, force, or intimidation to control or manipulate a family member, a partner, or former partner are all types of family violence, including domestic violence. In these relationships, there is an imbalance of power where abusive behavior or violence is used to control others. So I implore you, if you want to know more about that, so that this isn't, an hour long, to look up the power and control wheel. And the power and control wheel is going to give you, and then there's so many. You can find a wheel that's just like 4 or 5, but then you can find the really big DV power and control wheel that talks about all different ways that you can control a person. And we're going to get into that a little bit today as well. But the whole point is that it's the imbalance of power piece. Somehow, one of the members of a household has been able to gain this almost dictatorship level of control at some point in time.
Yep.
Family violence occurs, and this is very important, among all types of families. It's regardless of your income, your profession, religion, ethnicity, sexual orientation, educational level, or race. And I will tell you that I have seen instances of family violence amongst all of those different types or categories of families. Generational trauma is where I want to start. So we have had individuals come on to talk to us about the DV experiences that they have had with their partners. What we have found as a really common tool or a common occurrence in each of those is that they have experienced trauma in their own childhoods, and they've also had the effects of trauma from their own mothers and grandmothers. So I'm going to give you the definition of first, but then let's talk about it a little bit because I know you have an opportunity to see this on a regular basis as a social worker. So the transmission of traumatic experiences from one generation to subsequent generations, self-explanatory, right? Mm-hmm. But the results are long-lasting psychological, physiological, and social impacts. The mechanisms of transmission, so the ways that generational trauma can be moved on from one generation to the next. Well, your first is epigenetics. This is where trauma legitimately alters gene expression patterns, which can be passed down to offspring. You and I have had so many conversations about how we talk about how women, when you carry a child in utero and then give birth to that child, you always carry a little bit of that child and your future grandchildren in you because you've passed those genes on.
Yep.
And if we can pass just those type of genes on to people, what they realize, at least epigeneticists, there's a word for you, and I am not an expert in that field, but I can read and I can understand, is that you can also pass those expression patterns down to offspring that are negative. It's not just your good traits, right?
Absolutely.
Learned behaviors is probably the one that you see the most in terms of how generational trauma is transmitted. Children who witness or experience trauma will adopt coping mechanisms or beliefs that perpetuate the cycle of trauma. So this is nurture, the nature over nurture part, right?
Yep.
Intergenerational relationships. Parents or caregivers who have experienced trauma may pass on their anxieties, fears, and coping styles to their children. And the best example that we can give of this is your domestic violence example, where grandma lives a certain way with grandpa. Let's say, for example, he comes home drunk, beats her up on a regular basis, and her daughter then grows up seeing this and hears from her mom, because say we're back in the 30s and 40s, right? Mm-hmm. All you have to do is, give him his beer and stay out of his way.
Yep.
Don't be loud. Don't cause problems. And then when that little girl grows up and she picks a man, and whether we want to believe it or not, women often pick somebody who's kind of similar to their daddies. Mm-hmm. It's not always true, but in this situation, we'll say that it is. All of a sudden, he starts drinking and losing his temper. And she says to her mom, "Oh, well, I'm starting to have these problems." And she says, "I've told you before, you just got to stay quiet. You just have to stay calm. Give in to what he needs, give him these things, and it won't happen. It won't be as bad."
Don't make him mad.
Don't make him mad, right? And so then her little girl sees it, and onward we go. Where we have an issue come up, though, and we noticed this with one of our survivors before who came on, as generations go by and women have more abilities to express themselves, both in look at us, two strong females podcasting, right?
Yeah.
Well, we get mouthy.
Yeah.
Women get mouthier. And when you get mouthier, when you've been trained, when you've been told your whole life that you just need to be quiet so you don't make him mad, and then as a result, you do make him mad, then you can see, again, just additional trauma that's occurring in the home then for kids to see. Because now they're seeing that if you express yourself or if you try to get help, it's going to make it worse.
Right.
It's just such a terrible, vicious cycle. Mm-hmm. I also want to throw a caveat out here for anybody who might be offended. I apologize in advance, but I am going to continue in this situation to have the victim or the survivor be female and the perpetrator, in this case, be male. And that is not because I don't have domestic violence perpetrators who are women, but as I have explained before, 98%, I believe, of perpetrators are actually men. And of the roughly, God, I don't even know, 700 plus domestic violence, family violence cases I've seen come through just since I've been on the bench. This doesn't include my prior career as a prosecutor and dealing with neglect and abuse cases. I've had 7, maybe, where we have a true perpetrator of family violence that is female. Okay. And
the rest of the 700 some cases are male.
Yeah, it's not just that. It's that if I get female perpetrators that come in, what happens is they're charged with a crime because they have thrown something at their partner. They have assaulted their male partner, and the male partner calls the cops.
Yeah.
They don't have a problem calling the police on the female who's acted out. They're actually victims of domestic violence, family violence in the home, if they've decided to fight. And what happens when a female decides to fight in these situations, or a child, and the police get called, they're less inclined to explain what happened or what's been happening, because police are there to do a thing, and that's to investigate the incident offense. And the incident offense is, my favorite one is, she threw a piece of cheese at him. So this is a case where you have a male who has consistently been violent with his wife, and he consistently comes home drunk. And one night, she couldn't take it anymore. His yelling, he comes home drunk and he screams, where's my fucking dinner? Where's my dinner? And she gets into the fridge, and as he's screaming at her, grabs a piece of cheese and throws it at his head and says, there's your fucking dinner, right?
Yep.
There's your piece of cheese. She can't take it anymore. He had zero problem calling law enforcement. She was arrested.
Yes.
For domestic violence. Okay.
Yes.
Now I look at those.
Victim of the cheddaring.
A victim of cheddar. A victim. It was mozzarella. A victim of mozzarella. And so what happens when I get this case then in front of me, I'm taking a plea. I think it was probably pled down to a disorderly person, but I still consider these are all domestic family violence cases anyway. We do investigations then before I put them on probation. And in this particular instance, what we discovered through having a complete assessments in and give us an evaluation, like her life eval, like this is really about me, who I am as a person, is that she was finally acting out and just couldn't take that anymore. So she came in as a perpetrator of domestic violence, but she was really a victim.
Right.
That is the majority of those cases.
Yeah.
So again,
that makes sense.
Really long explanation as to why I'm going to refer to the he as the perpetrator and she, or the kids, theys, as the victim.
Yeah. I'm glad that you did.
So another generational trauma thing, I'm not going to spend a ton of time on, because we legit, Charnel could make an entire podcast just off of it. It's cultural narratives. So shared historical traumas can be passed down through cultural narratives, perpetuating a sense of collective trauma. So slavery in the United States and what has happened with our African-American sisters and brothers in terms of what they've experienced since then, I mean, it's a real thing. The same for our Native American population. I mean, it's the whole reason that we have the Indian Child Welfare Act and the Michigan Indian Welfare Act program that comes in, and you guys have them in your states too, I'm sure, because every state in the union has some type of an indigenous population. But we are now aware that those traumas that happened in the past because of something that happened to them, that they didn't ask for it. Our Native Americans here did not ask for us pilgrims to come in and take over their land and, give them smallpox and stuff. So that's what I mean by cultural narratives, and why we literally could pick any specific cultural group here and talk about that. I'm going to focus more on individual families today.
Yeah.
So the impacts of generational trauma, you and I see every day. We have legal issues first, right? So these are being charged with crimes, you being charged with the crimes because of what you've seen or been exposed to, or child protective service cases, having cases come through and you see the same families over and over again.
Yes.
When I talk to law enforcement groups, and most recently at the event that I spoke at, I talk about legal issues, and, to the one side of the room where apparently police officers feel comfort in numbers, so they all sit together.
Yeah.
Said, how many of you are seeing now the same people and their kids and their grandkids coming through the system, and all for similar type of issues, right?
Yep.
Substance abuse. that comes up on here as one of the impacts of generational trauma, and that substance abuse is often used as a coping mechanism, which means when you and I get these cases, they're all co-occurring disorders.
Yes.
We have violence in the home, we have substance use, and we usually have the other big one, mental health issues. It's the grand trio. It's like the holy trinity of trauma.
It is.
Right? Mental health, substance abuse, and then the actual criminality, right? Anxiety, depression, post-traumatic stress disorder. And when you're dealing with people who have mental health issues on top of everything that they've seen and grown up seeing and now are passing on to their children, we just get a whole different level of what their needs are and whether or not we're meeting them correctly as a community. Chronic disease.
Yes.
When I was first introduced to the ACEs study, which I will give credit to Folletti on this one. Look up ACEs Too High, ACES, the number 2, HIGH.com. And that study is a beautiful recitation of what child trauma is. Adverse childhood experiences and what can happen as a result. Those children, and they give you an actual statistic, which I cannot recall off the top of my head, but largely more likely to succumb to a heart attack, have high blood pressure, other chronic illnesses and diseases, autoimmune disorders.
Those are huge.
And stroke. Absolutely. Yes. So these are things that can affect you. And then you pass that on to your children.
Yep.
Sometimes through societal things like diet and exercise and things that you may do or not do in your home because they're just not part of your culture. Relationship difficulties. Well, that's a given because I'm talking about DV and family violence. Intergenerational poverty.
Yeah, that's a huge one.
So can you think of a time or an example, Charnel, that you were dealing with a family having issues with like, we call them dirty house cases?
Yeah.
And I mean, think about those, right?
Yeah.
These are people who have nothing and have grown up having nothing, and they pass on having nothing.
They do. And their habits of not knowing how to have anything. And this may sound simple, but the habits of never being taught how to clean. If you grew up in a house that was constantly dirty and no one ever showed you the appropriate way to wash dishes, wash yourself, wash your environment around you, what chemicals to use, things like that, this is not common sense, is not common, you guys. If that's all you've ever known, that's what you're comfortable in. And you don't know any different until you expand your environment and go out and maybe go and experience something different. But you know what? Those experiences, they cost money.
Yeah.
Being able to get to a friend's house can cost money.
Well, and you're judged because with that intergenerational poverty comes my last impact that I'm going to talk about, and that's social disenfranchisement.
Yep.
When you aren't part of the group, when you aren't part of society's norm, you are less inclined to reach out to help because one, there's distrust in a system that has not been helpful to you. Because you know that if you call the police to get help, you're likely to get arrested yourself. Or because you have a warrant because you shoplift to be able to feed your family, right? Because every time law enforcement comes to your house, someone goes to jail. Well, as a child, you're not going to look as a police officer as somebody that you can go to help because the police officer to you is somebody who puts your mommy and daddy in jail.
Yes.
Right? Every time there's an argument.
Every time.
And then you just become more separated. And then when we're dealing with poverty and social disenfranchisement in a place like where we live, it's the rurality of it, the fact that we are so rural. Your access to services and transportation are slim to none and you are isolated.
Yes. Not only that, but I'll take it even a step farther. You're also uncomfortable being with people who, let's take kids, for example. My children have brought children over that I can read and tell that they are uncomfortable with the cleanliness of our house, with the way that our house looks, that this is not normal. Of what
sometimes it's not comfortable for me because your house is so pristine that it makes mine look terrible. I'm not a great housekeeper, but you know the difference between filth, right?
Yes,
between something that
neglect and just lived in.
And when we say she says neglect, you guys, she means environmental neglect. Yep. We know that a lot of times this population that I'm discussing that we've worked with, they love their kids just as much as you love your kids. They just have a different explanation or a different way of living in terms of that cleanliness piece.
Yes.
So
But
environmental neglect's a thing.
And socially, we tend to surround ourselves with people of likeness, right? So when you talk about social isolation, the people that you might befriend in school and beyond are going to be people that have similar home lives to you. That it's similar to say like, oh yeah, my mom and dad fight all the time too. I have had one of my children's friends, I've overheard this conversation of, well, what do you mean you've never heard your mom and stepdad get into a fight?
Yeah.
And they're like, well, they just don't fight. Well, then what do they do? I mean, that was his next question. Well, so what do they do?
Right.
Because that's his frame of reference, is if you're in a marriage, either whether, still together parents or separated parents, like in relationships, the mommy and the daddy, they fight.
Yeah.
That's what they do.
It's yelling, it's screaming, it's name calling, it's possibly leading up to physical abuse. These are things that children see, and these are things that some of you out there may be experiencing and may not realize that you are passing on to your children.
Sure.
You will, if you are able to separate yourself from the situation enough. And I know many survivors of family violence, of domestic violence, who've been able to get help and resources for these things. They look back at what their children were exposed to, and it is devastating for them to realize the trauma that they may have exposed their children to because they were in fact a victim themselves.
Absolutely.
So, I mean, again, these are just things that we see. And this is not to say that sometimes victims, survivors, if they're lucky, of family violence, don't place their kids at such a significant risk that there has to be some type of involvement from the state.
Sure.
Okay.
Yes.
There are going to be times when this type of generational trauma is going to lead to some type of removal. And that's never what we want to see happen.
No.
We always want to see, in my opinion at least, I always want to see survivors, victims of these offenses, getting services provided to them so that they can escape the pattern and provide a whole different kind of life. But that doesn't always happen.
There are times of failure to protect.
Sure, no. Think of the genuine distrust for the system. And when you distrust the system to such a level, again, because of potential generational trauma, you are not going to be inclined to cooperate with law enforcement, prosecution, the courts, CPS at all.
No.
So we'll get into that as well. Types of family violence. Do you want to throw some out there? Tell me types of just violence in general. It's not even family. Types of violence.
You know what one that I want to throw out that I don't think that people readily think of?
Yeah.
Because we know we have our typical like emotional and
there's one.
In sexual violence.
There's
and,
two.
And physical violence.
There's three.
Right? Animal abuse.
Yes, absolutely.
People don't realize that was something that was profound for me as a CPS worker. How many times people said I couldn't leave because he would threaten to kill my dog.
Yes.
Right? Threaten to kill the kids, threaten to kill me. Of course, there are those, but it's the animals. There are so much manipulation through anything that we love. Or, well, he's gonna do this to my mom, to my family, right?
Those are
extended threats that do not that go even outside of the home, right? That might seem irrational, but they're very real.
They are.
To the person.
Animal abuse is going to be right on here as a type of family violence. Absolutely. The number of people that I see come through who say, I cannot leave because he will kill my pet.
Yes.
Okay. You call it physical. This is obvious. Physical abuse is legit any unwanted touching. It doesn't even have to be violent, okay? Sometimes the physical abuse is him saying, and this is in tons of police reports that I've read, where and let me be clear, this is where the offender has either been found guilty or accepted accountability for the offense in some way, shape, or form, and they are on probation with me.
Yep.
I'm not talking about cases where a person has been acquitted.
Sure.
Or the case was dismissed, okay? And we know lots of reasons cases are dismissed that I'm going to talk about too that aren't always right, but it happens.
Yep.
I am talking about a offender. Well, I was just moving her to the side. She was, or she was blocking the doorway, and I was just trying to leave. So I thought that it was okay to grab her arms and move her.
So minimization.
Absolutely. But it is a physical assault. It is an unwanted touching.
Yep.
Grabbing the child out of her hands. grabbing her phone out of her hands. Well, that's also a felony, because if she was trying to call 911 when you did that, it's interfering with electronic communications.
Yep.
We'll get to the charges in a minute as well.
Standing in front of the door, being a blockade.
Yeah, but taking the keys out of her hand, taking the child out of her hand. If you can physically assault a person or batter a person by making contact with an implement or thing that they are holding, including another person or a pet. Okay, those are all ways to exhibit violent physical behavior.
What about emotional manipulation? I will kill myself if you leave.
Emotional is right on here. And it is one of gaslighting is a newer term for some of us. It has always existed.
Yep.
Love bombing, gaslighting. People call them what you want now, whatever the popular terminology is. It is manipulation.
It is.
That's what it is.
Yep.
Okay. Manipulation is one of the more severe forms of emotional violence.
Yeah.
You are telling somebody who loves you, who you've been awful to, right? Who you were abusing, that you're going to kill yourself if they don't stay. If you report this, well, our whole life will be over. My life will be over. Our lives as we know it. They're going to take the kids. They're going to take the pets. If you tell, I'm going to have no choice but to commit suicide.
Yep.
Okay.
This is all your fault. You will be destroying our family and everything that we've worked for.
And the people who are surviving those type of targeted manipulative attacks are in such a vulnerable position of guilt, because what if they're the what if people. They're the what if he drives off the side of the road with my children in the car,
right?
Or me in the car. I've had multiple domestic violence incidents that I call rolling domestics, where the individual is driving a vehicle. They are engaged in an active domestic violence situation with her as the passenger, and there's even potentially their children in the back of the car. And during that rolling domestic, he is indicating and possibly even attempting to move off the side of the road at high rates of speed or concerning reckless type driving, that they're going to end this all for everyone. I'm going to kill us all then.
Yep.
If I can't have you, if you're really going to leave, if you're going to follow through with that divorce, if you're going to report this to the police, put the phone down or I'm going off the side. And I'm super sorry, by the way, if this is triggering, and I probably should have said that to you earlier. I will be giving examples as we go through so you can understand what I mean by these.
Okay, I want to take it even a step farther.
Okay.
All right, because we have the emotional manipulation, but guess what, guys? That does not just come from the perpetrator themselves. How about after an arrest is made and then mother or mother-in-law or sister-in-law or family member
contact.
Yes, comes in and says, this is all your fault. You had him arrested. You're the reason that the kids are taken away. That you, again, because of the generational piece, that I have seen women go back, drop charges, and go back to their perpetrator so often because of the external from the immediate nuclear family coming in and guilt tripping, manipulating, abusing them all over again with the emotional manipulation of, how could you do this? How could you have him arrested? You couldn't have just worked this out between the two of you. You made him mad.
Do you know how many people that as a jurist we see on probation who their family members call in constantly in defense of that person? First of all, I'm not going to entertain that because I don't care. Yeah. I'm just going to be honest. I don't care what your opinion of your darling son or daughter, whoever I have on probation is. I really don't. You're biased.
Of course.
You only see, and you know what? I want you to love your child.
Yes.
I have questions as to what they saw growing up that would lead them to believe that behavior was appropriate.
Right.
And I do think that there may be an occasion here or there where I get somebody the first time. And maybe they haven't acted like this before, but I'm using that almost sarcastically, like really on the verge there with me making that statement, because almost never is that the case. By the time you come into my court, there have been multiple instances of domestic violence type behavior. And that, again, does not just, I get them say, well, he hasn't hit her before. He's never hit her. This is the first time he only touched her arm, whatever. Yeah, but you left out psychological, emotional. How about economic?
Yes.
How about the fact that you have isolated a person away from their family members? They're only exposed to your family members now.
Yes.
You have a joint checking account. You take the card away.
Yep.
Or there was only one vehicle. And she doesn't have an access to that to leave.
Yep. The financial abuse of it all.
Verbal. Just the constantly being told that you're worthless, that you're a piece of shit, that you're a whore. It comes up all the time.
All the time.
I get this. Well, we were fighting over somebody's infidelity. Okay. We were fighting because she's a whore. We were fighting, those type of things. Or what I've seen come up a lot lately is the victim, my survivor, she's seen something inappropriate on a phone and she's like, are you having an affair? And then he becomes violently angry that she would have the gall to accuse him of this, even though it's right there.
Of course.
And engage then in domestically violent behavior, and that manipulation piece starts, or it rises to the level of physical violence.
Well, lies always hate being challenged, Megan.
Of course. Legal abuse.
Yes.
I'm going to hire an attorney. You're never going to see the kids again. I'm going to file for custody. You're a shitty mom. You're a terrible person. I know that one time in 1984 you smoked marijuana. Like these are all things.
I'm going to convince all of our family and friends of what a horrible person you are.
Or I'm going to make something up. I'm going to make up a crime you committed. I'm going to tell your job that you embezzled from them. I'm going to tell your job that you did these terrible things so you get fired. All of these things, this legal abuse piece. And then we're an overly litigious society anyway. I'm going to sue you.
Yep.
All of the stuff that, like, you have a relationship perhaps, and maybe somebody has loaned somebody money and it's a true loan, not a gift. I'm going to sue you for this. You're going to owe me thousands of dollars. Just this happens often. Technological abuse is the last one I want to talk about. We have this really beautiful thing now with the use of our telephones. And when people are really shitty, awful, terrible human beings, sometimes they take information or photographs or things like that that was consensually given to them during the loving part of their relationship, and then blackmail and use those things against you. And we call it revenge porn. It doesn't have a pretty name because it isn't pretty.
It isn't. It is one of the worst things that you could do to a human.
There is nothing
next to murder.
There is nothing that will make me more angry than having somebody come in and say, well, the reason I didn't report this is because he has nude photographs of me. And then, well, were they consensual? Well, yes. And are you over 18? Because if you're not, by the way, that's illegal possession of child sexually abusive material, even of yourself. Note that. If you're 17 and you have a picture of your vagina on your phone, that's illegal. So you might want to delete it. And also don't share it with anyone.
Do not send it. Don't put it on Snapchat.
Right. But 18, so you're 18, you're 19 years old, and you've sent a photograph to somebody who you love because they wanted a picture because you guys were engaging in some appropriate consensual online sexual activity.
Yes.
And then he says, I'm going to go and use this against you. Then I have to see your pictures, and I feel terrible that I have to see your pictures. And the prosecutor doesn't want you to see your pictures, but there's nothing worse than that being the reason that you didn't report abuse, because he has this hold over you.
Can I tell you that I have a client who, it was a terrible relationship, but during their divorce, she decided to send an entire video of him pleasuring himself that he made per her request when they were married.
Sure.
Okay. He sent
to
it
his mother,
to his whole family. So not only is he traumatized, but every member in her contacts of his family opened up a text message from her that was what the video was.
You know, again, it's one of these things where I'm just going to make a couple comments on it. One, it's illegal. It's just a level of blackmail and potentially using a telecommunications device to threaten, molest, or harass. And I don't know if people know that that's a thing, but it is. And even if you're sending it to somebody else, if it causes somebody else to feel threatened or harassed, and that's a misdemeanor, but I mean, use of the computer to commit a crime can be thrown on there as well, depending on what type of information you're sending. My advice in these situations and to everyone is that if you end a relationship with someone and they have sent you very intimate pictures because you were involved in that type of a relationship, be a decent human being and delete them.
Yes.
Or at least to never show them to anyone, because those were given to you in trust. And I don't care what somebody does to you or you have done to them to end the relationship. That is just one of those intimate, sacred things.
Yes.
Better yet, I mean, don't send them, but I mean, come on, who hasn't sent a racy message to their significant other?
Of course. It's a new way to flirt with each other and keep things spicy.
It
there's
absolutely
nothing
is
wrong with that.
And when you go to certain therapists or sexual therapists, when you're dealing with relationships, I have often heard them say, or have heard somebody else say, well, they told me I should, spice things up by sending a racy text, or, here's a picture of my thigh and my panties for at the end of the day, so you know what to come home to. I mean, some of you may be rolling your eyes saying that's stupid, but when you have actual trained professionals telling people in their relationships that these are ways to spice things up.
Yep.
But then you get into a case where you have a domestically violent situation where that then gets used against them. Well, that's when we have these technological abuses.
Yes.
So charges, and we've touched on a lot of these already. So you have domestic violence and aggravated domestic violence. Aggravated domestic violence is if there's a domestic violence that results in any type of an injury, but not usually a serious injury. We'll get to that in a minute as well. It is a travesty, in my opinion, that in most states, domestic violence is a misdemeanor that carries 93 days or less in jail on the second offense, or aggravated domestic are only 1 year.
Yeah.
Okay. And this is on top of the fact that in our state, for example, there is a statutory deferral called the Spouse Abuse Act under MCL 769.4A that would allow you to complete a probationary period without having a conviction. Now, I'm not saying that's not a good thing, because I do have offenders come through who complete these programs, and they're very helpful. And then their record is not quote unquote ruined. Mm-hmm. But we also have to take a devil's advocate position on that as well, or the victim's advocate position on this as well. And that's that, where's their do-over? Mm-hmm. How do I get to not have to experience this? So probably what's the most concerning is that if you have a person who is a true abuser, who is serially abusing his family members domestically, you have the deferral you can get. Then you can get a first offense domestic violence. Then you can get a second offense domestic violence. And you have 3 instances that are all basically punishable by less than a year in jail.
Wow.
Okay. Mm-hmm. And in every situation, you're highly unlikely to actually receive any actual jail time, depending on what's happening in your county and how they can handle misdemeanor cases, which I'll get to later. Mm-hmm. So it's finally the 4th offense really that gets you a domestic violence third or subsequent. Mm-hmm. There's nothing after third. It's DV third or subsequent, which makes it a felony level.
Because now you're habitual.
Well, basically, you can actually
in the eyes of the law.
Right. Well, you would have to have a prior felony to be supped as a habitual offender, but it's a third offense is how they do that. So there's also assault with intent to do great bodily harm, less than murder. These are strangulation cases. Okay. And this is the point where I think I stand up on my soapbox and remind everyone, as we have done on many cases here, that you don't choke human beings.
No.
You choke on food. Mm-hmm. You strangle human beings. The act of placing your hands on somebody's neck is strangulation, even in a good way. So all of my kink people out there, erotic asphyxiation, having your lover apply some type of gentle pressure to your neck so that you can reach some type of climax, or just frankly enjoy it, it's still strangulation. Mm-hmm. It's just consensual. That's not something that is going to rise to the level of domestic violence if you've consented and have safe words and all those type of things.
Of course.
But it's not choking. And so you may say, hey, choke me, baby, but it's not.
No, right.
Because, again, you choke on food.
Right.
That could lead up to, we're talking also assault with intent to do great bodily harm as any type of, you could have a felonious assault. That's another charge. That's if somebody uses a weapon. So you're being held at gunpoint, at knife point. Somebody assaults you with something, like hits you with brass knuckles or finds an implement, a tool, a wrench, something to assault you with during your family violence situation. Mm-hmm. That's your felonious assault. If the intent gets there enough, you could have an attempted murder. And then our worst case scenario is that somebody succumbs.
Yes.
And you actually have a homicide as a result. Vulnerable adult abuse is one that I see charged, but as of right now, that is not does not include physical in the state of Michigan. It's financial. It's economic.
Oh, okay.
If you're actually charged with abusing physically a vulnerable adult, it's usually charged still under domestic violence or assault and battery or some type of aggravated circumstance. Computer crimes, I've indicated before, use of a computer to commit a crime or sharing information via that platform. Criminal sexual conduct in varying degrees. Mm-hmm. So that is using sexual, either physical sexual assault or some type of a sexual violence against somebody. We have many situations where women do not realize that if you are married, you can actually say no to your spouse.
Yes, you can.
Yeah, and
At any time.
and if they take advantage of you, if they force you to intersexual relationships, you being married is not a defense to that. If you didn't consent, you can say no at any point in time, even when you're married. And people use physical sexual violence in marriages all the time to keep people there, to keep them from telling.
Sexual manipulation.
Absolutely. Stalking. So stalking's significant, especially with my survivors who have been able to get themselves and their families out of the home. And then you have the worst of the worst, in my opinion, at this point, because not only has somebody been found to have assaulted you, but to the point where there's some type of an order even in place to keep them away from you. And they're walking through these orders to continue to hurt you. And I'm not just talking physically. Stalking is to harass, molest, any type of undue, unwanted contacts are stalking. Driving past your house, texting you, sending emojis. These are the reasons that when I issue no contact orders, I'm very specific about them.
Creating fake Facebook accounts and friending you so they can stalk you on social media. Having family and friends stalk you on social media.
Absolutely. Malicious use of telecommunications device, which I explained, it can be sending text, but it's also that online component as well. And then animal cruelty, which we've discussed before, because people will protect their pets pretty much at all costs, to be honest, even at their own risk.
Yeah.
We talk about disclosing and why survivors of family violence don't report or delay reporting. And I usually conduct a disclosure exercise at this point while I'm giving my talk, but instead you and I are just going to talk frankly about it. You know, we're given this situation where you are who you are, right? Mm-hmm. You are a person who is a professional in the community, who has a husband who, like we jokingly refer to as the mayor of Hillsdale. Like he legit knows everybody.
He does.
And is liked, if not loved, by most of the community. And so you're in a situation then, using you as an example. This is not true, by the way, but I'm using her as an example, where you are being abused at home. And the thought going through your head then is, who will believe me? How do I tell? Right. And it's the embarrassment piece of it as well. So the exercise that I gave was, making somebody stand up from your group or from your table. If you're with people right now, think of one person standing up, and then
we can actually tell the funny story from what happened at the ball.
Okay.
You asked people to stand up, one person from every table to stand up, but didn't tell them why. And as it happens, one of your daughters stood up as the representative of her table.
She did.
And then you proceeded to tell them what they have, the person who was standing up.
I said, everybody, I'm going to ask you a question. It's harmless. I just need you to pick somebody. She was one of the people who stood up.
Yep.
And then I said, okay, the question I'm going to ask is, tell me about your best sexual experience.
Yep.
Okay. The room fills with laughter. My daughter very quickly sits down, and I have a video of her going literally WTF.
She melted into her seat. Like, ooh, please don't see me because I'm not about to tell my mother and this whole group in front of my mother and father my best sexual experience.
Right. So then after that, the laughter dies down, but just think about it. And you guys think about asking people this yourself if you want to engage in this exercise in a safe manner, in a way that is not going to get you in trouble. And then ask them why. So why wouldn't you report then, right?
Right. Why wouldn't you want to tell them?
Right. I mean, I said to everybody, were they a little bit upset maybe that I asked them something so personal? And then were they a little bit like, I'm embarrassed, like in Grace's situation? Like, why do you feel the things that you feel? And then it's putting it in perspective then. Okay. So think about the fact that after you get asked this really personal thing, after you get asked about the worst thing that's ever happened to you, and it's by a police officer, and they have a gun on their hip.
Well, and you were asking for our best sexual
Yeah,
experience.
so what about your worst?
So imagine what it would be like to have to tell somebody your worst.
And not just a sexual experience, your worst experience, just period.
In general.
At home with something that was private. Again, you are
So
who you are.
intimate.
Married to Mayor Matt. And this thing has happened to you. And so now you have a police officer in front of you and they have radio on and you can hear the talk, even though I have it turned down, and they're asking you everything that happened. And then you do all of that knowing that within a few days, you're going to have to retell your story again. Only this time it's going to be to a detective. Okay. And then you're going to have to go talk to a prosecutor, and the prosecutor is going to ask you things to possibly prepare you for trial. And then you're trying to figure out what you're doing with your family in the meantime, because the judge, he's arrested and the judge just told him he can't have contact, but you still have a home together and you have children together and you have pets in your home. And you don't know what to do with any of those things other than he's not allowed to come back now. And maybe you're somebody who can't live without 2 incomes and you don't know how to pay your bills. So,
and you likely have family coming at you too that don't understand and that have their own opinions and are being very harsh about some of this.
And not just you, but the community, because you have people saying there's no way this person ever would have done that.
Of course not.
There's no way that we can believe what you're saying. You must have lost your mind. Are you crazy, or are you just mad at him?
Right.
Because this person who I know wouldn't do this, or his family, my son would never. Right.
Or here's a very popular one. You're the one cheating and you're just trying to blame him to get out of this marriage.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So because you were looking to get out of the marriage, now somehow, and I'm not saying that people don't do bad things.
Certainly.
That people don't do things that are probably against the marital code or what your relationship code was, but not one of those things is a justification to be assaulted or battered in any way, shape, or form, or to have those things, your children exposed to those things as well.
Right.
So then you realize, so not just the prosecutor, right, who's probably going through things relatively gentle to prepare you for trial, but then they're telling you, like, they want you to show up to trial. And if you don't show up to trial, and if you don't show up and tell everything again, your case is going to get dismissed. So then months later, probably 6 months later, we try to do it sooner, but like 6 months later, say, or within the year, you're sitting at a trial. Only this time the person asking you questions isn't being as gentle, because that person is called a defense attorney.
Yeah.
And their goal is to defend the accused and to see if they can dig holes into everything that you said happened and to make you feel like you're responsible or you're a liar. And this isn't me being critical of defense attorneys, who are some of the best people that I know. This is them doing their jobs.
This is their job.
And then you couple that with the fact that you're testifying to all of these things in court, and you're in front of this judge, and it's me, and you know her, and you see her in the community, and you feel like you're the one that's on trial.
Absolutely.
These are all of the things that somebody goes through in a best case scenario on a domestic violence, where they've actually been able to follow it through, where it's come to fruition that they have actually taken it to trial.
Yes. Yes.
And this is beside the fact that while you're testifying to all this, the person who hurt you is sitting feet from you. And this is a person who promised to love you and cherish you, and for better, for worse, be there for you so you can raise and you still have kids.
Yep.
And there's still visitation, because even though there's a no contact with you, there's not a no contact with the kids. And you're exchanging those kids through the third person. And maybe it's his mom, and she's like, hey, whore, you're the reason that this is happening. And your kids are struggling in school now, and it's your fault because you couldn't stay a complete family.
And then your kids come home and they ask you why you have done this to the family. Daddy's nice. Daddy's such a good guy. Daddy said to tell you he loves you.
Right.
Daddy said that you're the reason why we can't see him anymore.
Yes.
Use the children as tools. It is horrible, and it happens every single day.
So that's just one really specific example of what it looks like to go through that process. But so then we have to ask ourselves the why. Why don't survivors of family violence report or delay reporting? And again, this often comes up where I have law enforcement, and I have great law enforcement officers. We are lucky to have those in our community, and you are too. But you will always run into a law enforcement officer who is irritated.
Yeah.
Who is like, well, why'd you delay?
Yep.
What do you mean I'm taking a delayed domestic? It's a thing. They legit call it a delayed domestic, because maybe she's at the emergency room because it's 3 days post. And now all of a sudden there are some physical issues. And guess what? The ER does when somebody reports a family violence. They report it.
Yeah.
So now you're there taking a delayed report, and for some reason the police officer is not having their best day, and they're annoyed that they have to take this quote unquote delayed report, and you feel like you are not being believed.
Mm-hmm.
Like you are being judged now because of what happened. So fear of being judged, not being believed, fear of retaliation by the perpetrator. How many women or children are not reporting because they are afraid if they tell, it will just get worse?
Yes, because it has for people before.
How about the effect on your career or future prospects?
Yes.
How about the thought that your employer might decide that you are less than credible, or that they don't want somebody who's dealing with this something so public in their workspace?
Yep.
Maybe you're a salesperson at a local car dealership and they're like, ooh, you're bad for business.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Or you're a lawyer in a law firm, or you're a doctor. And they don't want you treated. I mean, these are all things that people think about ruining their careers, especially women who some of us have had to work a lot harder than others to even get where we are. Because it used to be that in order to be in a position like I'm in, you would have been on your knees a lot, not a good way to get to where you are. Go back, 50 years ago.
Absolutely.
Embarrassment, feeling responsible for the abuse, afraid for your children, afraid to lose your children. We just talked about that CPS piece.
Yes.
What happens when CPS comes to investigate and they go talk to your child at school without you present?
Yep.
And you don't know what they're going to say, because if they tell the truth, it probably doesn't look very good.
Right.
Because it looks like you've been
failing to protect.
Yeah, it looks like you've been letting this abuse occur in the home. You feel like reporting will make it worse. As we've talked about before, that they will hurt or kill your pets. And they legit threaten. If you leave me, I will kill this dog. If you leave me, I will kill your cat. And these are your babies. And you know that if you take your cat or your dog and your kids and you try to leave and you go to the shelter, you might be told that pets can't stay there. Now, we have some fantastic shelters here, and some of you might as well, who can partner, community partners, to take those pets and hold on to them in your care so you can get to safety. But some places don't have that and don't have those partners. And then, of course, threats to hurt or kill. What about just the obvious? I'm not going to be cooperative because I know he's going to walk through any restraining order that you put in place and he's going to kill me. And I'm not putting myself at that risk. I would rather know that he's there with me and that I might get beat up than have him sneak up on me and kill me. So the how part then of do we prevent family violence comes up. And this is just my string of questions that we're going to go through and I'm going to attempt to answer. How do we prevent it? Is it possible for a perpetrator of family violence to change? Are we holding perpetrators accountable in our communities? How is this affecting our children? And then most importantly, how do we empower survivors of family violence? In terms of prevention, the single best thing that you can do as a community member is to educate yourself about domestic violence. If you are a person who is lucky enough to have never been exposed to any type of a family violence situation, then you need to go on, in my opinion, and learn about it. Not just, from what I'm telling you today, like this is a good start.
Yeah.
You're a captive audience today. You've intentionally, good job. Pat yourself on the back. You're intentionally listening to a pod on family violence.
Yep.
But there's more for you to learn, because I can't talk to you for 12 hours. We could start a podcast just on domestic violence education.
Sure.
Okay. You can look things up online. You can go to the National Domestic Violence Hotline, which is a hotline, by the way, that people can call if you Google that, but it also has information. You can look up the power and control wheel, and you can, as a citizen, as a concerned citizen who's maybe even never been assaulted or put in that position, contact your local shelter. In our county, it's called Domestic Harmony, and get information from them. And they would be so excited to give you information so you can aid in prevention. And then you can ask them, what can I do? What can I do as a citizen to do something to be involved? You can speak out against victim blaming and discrimination to end the stigma surrounding domestic violence. And you can recognize when you are victim blaming. I will not sit here and say that through my head over the years, I have not thought to myself, why in the hell did she wait so long to report?
Right.
Why in the hell would she put up with this for so long that she ended up getting the kids removed? And then I ask myself, and I tell myself now, and I'm an educated person, I'm educated on these things, and I have to ground myself again and say, Jesus Christ, Meg, no,
Right.
you just walked yourself through the exercise of why.
Yep.
Because if I was in that position and I had to go to all of these places and be embarrassed and be told that nobody would believe me, and I thought my career was on the line, and I thought that I would never be able to provide for my kids and they might get taken away, well, yeah, I'm probably not going to be forthcoming either.
What it all boils down to is fear. They let fear of all the things stop them.
So when you are blaming victims, when you are looking at a situation where domestic violence has become public, right? If you can't say anything nice, you don't say anything at all.
Right.
Okay. That's something my grandma taught me. And I continue to say that. You may not believe the victim. You may not believe the survivor because you know that that person who she's accusing is so nice and he would never do that. Okay. If that's how you feel, shut your mouth.
Keep it to yourself.
Keep it to yourself. It's not your business to have an opinion because people don't advertise the most intimate parts of their life and what's happening.
Right, exactly.
I am not going to walk up to you and start telling you about my worst sexual experience.
No.
I would tell you,
Yes.
but I'm just talking about in general, right?
Yep.
That's not something that we do. And you have to look at every situation like that.
Yep.
It's not happening or she would have told me. It's not happening because we would have known. I would have known if my baby boy was treating her so badly.
Here's the thing.
Would you have, or did your husband treat you the same way and he learned that and so you think that that's normal, stepmom or mother-in-law?
And also sometimes people are very, very good at making sure other people don't know.
Absolutely.
Out of fear.
So recognize when you're victim blaming, and if you are, shut up. I'll do the same thing. If you think that a person who is the victim or survivor of domestic violence or family violence isn't being truthful, be quiet because we don't need your opinion. There is a way for that truth to come out in a legal and a valid way. And victims of these real, true victims of this type of violence are going to feel more comfortable coming forward if they know that the people who need to know, the systems that are trying to process these cases will believe them and that they're safe when they're talking about it.
Yep.
If you suspect someone is being abused, report it.
Yes.
Do not be an inactive bystander. We've talked about bystander effect before.
Well, and how many times on these cases have people been interviewed in hindsight that we've covered and they're like, I always knew something was going on. I could hear them fighting all the time. I saw this. She once came out with a black eye and I wondered, it's over and over again on these cases that we cover.
So what a beautiful example. So if someone's in immediate danger, call 911. If you hear someone being abused through your apartment door because it's pretty thin or your neighbor, what is it going to hurt you in the immediate to call? And if you're mistaken, fine. Maybe they were having very aggressive consensual sex and it sounded like he was beating her.
Yep.
Okay. These things come up as excuses for me all the time. I will tell you that in the ones I've seen, I've believed them about 1% of the time.
Okay.
Okay. But it's making the call, being brave enough that when you see it or you hear it or you suspect something bad is happening to report it.
Yep.
I mean, we had our survivor come on and tell just the most beautiful story that I will continue to use an example. So all thanks to her on this, that when her domestic violence situation finally ended, it was because her neighbor called the police, as I think she'd done before, but this time she waited outside with her while she was injured as a violent perpetrator is trying to get her to come back in the house. And a police officer came up, and that police officer that day, if I could find that person or use her as an example to every law enforcement officer out there who's listening, says to her, she didn't come up and be judgmental.
Right.
She didn't come up and assess the situation and ask for any version of what happened. She came up and said, let me guess. He plays video games all day and he doesn't work. He beats you up when you don't get dinner on the table in time. He yells at you all the time for how you raise the children. Just really put it all out there for how it was in a way that she didn't feel bad anymore.
Right.
Like,
she understood.
it was so obvious that somebody understood exactly what she was dealing with.
Yep. And believed her because she has seen it as a law enforcement officer over and over and over again.
Advocate to your local, state, and national officials to hold offenders accountable and provide services and assistance for survivors and their families.
Yes.
When you are in either rural areas or even these large urban areas where the population is just so impressive that there's not enough services to keep up with what's happening, funding is always necessary. And we are in a time where funding could be cut at any minute for multiple programs. I'm not here to take a political stance. I'm here to say that if funding is lost for advocacy services and for offender accountability services in our communities will be at risk, families will be at risk, and specifically children will be at risk.
Yes.
Do you think it's possible for a perpetrator of family violence to change?
I do. Yeah, with the appropriate services.
And you have the caveat. So I always says, yes, everyone can change, but it does not happen in a vacuum. And here's what I mean. If you are out there and you are a survivor of family violence and maybe specifically domestic violence, or if you are a child out there or an adult child of family violence, you have been manipulated to the point where you believe that this person can change because they've allowed that to happen. They have manipulated you. There's this beautiful, for those of you who've experienced domestic assault, think about that honeymoon period after the first time that you were assaulted or battered. And they're very sorry. And they make you promises. I will go to counseling. I will do anything you want to keep this family together.
I will never do this again.
And then it happens again. And after it happens again, and maybe it's a little worse this time, they still say, I'm so sorry. I promise it won't happen this time. The only reason it happened a second time was because I drank alcohol. And
because I was drunk.
Yeah, you know that when I'm drinking, I get angry, and we should just avoid arguments. You should avoid arguing with me when I'm drinking. And yeah, there's your vicious cycle, right? That offender, you guys, will never change. And the manipulation will continue, and the behaviors will continue, because you can't stop the behavior in the vacuum. You cannot stop the behavior in the space, the continuum where they're surviving, where they're living. It requires supervision, accountability, and intervention. It requires court supervision. It requires accountability on the part of the perpetrator by virtue of them attending services that are ordered through a program. And it requires intervention when they are not following those rules.
Right.
Those are the only ways that I've ever seen anybody actually overcome being a batterer. Yeah. And I have seen successful people come out of it, and it takes a lot. And it very often requires ceasing that relationship entirely until that batterer is in a position where they can accept responsibility for what happened and move on in a better way.
And that's the big piece. It takes a person who is willing to change from the inside out through that accountability and accepting responsibility piece. Because we can shove services at people, right?
Sure.
But if, like you said, if they're...
benefit from.
Yeah. If they're not held accountable in terms of, listen, no, every time that you do not show up for one of these sessions, you're going to get hit with, more, whatever, a lengthier sentence, like whatever it may be. That's our responsibility to hold them accountable.
This is my new program that I'm going to talk to you about, and things that I think communities can do to help.
Yeah.
Because you have hit the nail on the head.
But it then takes them to go, oh shit.
How many times have you seen...
I have to make a change.
Have you seen courts put people on probation where they just basically report and they don't get in trouble again during the time they're on probation, but then they go out and reoffend? Yeah. It's recidivism. The rates are high.
Of course.
With domestic violence specifically. Well, first, we need approved batterers intervention programs, not anger management.
Yes.
Anger management is literally a class that we all could probably benefit from, okay?
Sure. Yeah.
This is teaching you to regulate
Most of the
emotions.
people I've seen on the road need anger management class.
Son of a bitch. There are many days that I tell myself, girl, you've got to take an anger management class. You're getting road rage or you're getting court rage, right? You're just so calm down. That does not make me a batterer. Being angry and reacting does not make you a batterer. Getting in a bar fight and punching someone, not related to you, by the way, that does not make you a batterer. It makes you an assault and batterer. You beat somebody up in public who was not related to you, and you got yourself in a bar fight or a frat fight or something like that, right? You
could benefit from anger management.
You would benefit from anger management because it would tell you coping mechanisms and ways to not get in that situation again, right? A batterer's intervention program actually makes you take a deeper look at your behaviors, your trauma, and the shit that you have to own, that you're perpetrating on others without placing any blame.
Yep.
An offender that comes through a batterer's intervention program, whom I am supervising right now, who can't use their I statements and make their I statements and take that accountability, they're not going to make it through my program.
Right. They will
probation.
not graduate.
No, they will probably end up in jail.
Yeah.
Because jail is being used in those specific circumstances as the appropriate punitive measure, the appropriate punishment for somebody who's not making it through. Are we holding them accountable? Okay, this is the big piece of what I just talked about. I mean, I ask everybody, how many of you think that if somebody's accused of domestic violence, they should just go to jail at the time of their sentencing? And
a lot of people raised their hand when you asked that during the
because
hearing.
it sounds so bad. And I had people come up to me afterward who were like, well, can't they just go to jail for a little bit? And I'm like, sure. There's such a thing as upfront jail. Most of the time they get their upfront jail when they're arrested.
Yeah.
Okay.
Right.
So the OVW has had a grant on improving criminal justice responses, and my court, I was able to obtain this. And I know not all of your communities have this type of grant funding available. I want to note, I spent years trying to get this funding, and I had already implemented I knew what I wanted a domestic violence court docket to look like, even without having an actual court funded for it. Mm-hmm. So one of the things I knew that needed to happen was trials and the court process for domestic related crimes need to be fast tracked.
Sure. Yes.
I learned from talking to survivors in the community, some of whom were maybe even highly critical of me in certain cases, that when I first took over, who were like, I can't believe you did that. I can't believe you let this person off probation, these type of things. Well, that I followed the rules. I did exactly what I was supposed to do, but I noticed they would recidivate, or I would still have a victim or a survivor like just feeling incredibly hurt by the entire process. All right, so the goal then here is I'm fast tracking these trials, Charnel, so that people are getting justice quicker, okay? At least they know. And the whole court process for domestic and family-related crimes in general, those type of things are not or should not be scheduled out for months, if not like 6 months to a year later.
Yes.
And we did have a significant backlog because of COVID. Most courts in the United States did.
Oh, for sure.
We've increased collaboration with our grant partner. In our case, it's our domestic violence shelter. Ours is called Domestic Harmony. So you guys, all of you out there from different communities, can be contacting, your domestic violence shelters and asking them questions like, do you collaborate with the prosecuting attorney's office? Do you collaborate with the courts? What can we do? Are there volunteer services? You can volunteer. You guys, if you have a passion for preventing family violence and advocating for survivors of family violence, almost every shelter that I'm aware of would love to have volunteers to come in and help man those shelters. Increasing collaboration with our prosecutors, victim advocacy, and with the courts to make that court process friendly when survivors of domestic violence are coming through. I do, in every single case, a no contact order that would not allow the perpetrator to have contact with the victim, the children, sometimes, depending on what the situation is. And if they violate my no contact orders, I take them very seriously. I'm personally offended.
Sure.
That you have violated a court order, and I consider it a complete lack of disrespect for the entire court process.
Yes, as it is.
And
it 100%
even
is.
if they are acquitted, even if you are found not guilty, I don't care. If you violate a court order, then you're going to be held accountable for it. And in this case, it's being consistent like you are with your children when they do something that's naughty. And that's that you get 30 days in jail for violating my court order. It's contempt. You will go to jail. You will sit in jail even if you are acquitted of the crime while you're waiting for your trial if you violate my court order. You have to have
that accountability piece.
You have to have teeth in it, or what does it matter?
For sure.
Anybody can walk through a restraining order. A PPO, by the way, is a personal protection order that's granted by the civil court that can protect you civilly. A no contact order is a bond condition. This is the reason you are allowed to be out of jail waiting for your trial. This is very different.
To say,
and
because you say you will not have contact.
No one can change and modify my orders. Survivors sometimes want those waived. I have had to take a very different stance in looking at those situations and taking on a very case-by-case basis, when do I let them waive their no contact? But gone are the days where if you want your no contact waive, you sign a piece of paper and it just comes off as a bond condition.
Right.
Absolutely not. Very rarely do I lift a no contact provision prior to sentencing, which means a person is going to get through the trial without having continued contact and manipulation. I do realize it's a very fine line to weigh between, can they survive without the income? Where are they home-wise? The perpetrator is not allowed to go back to the home, even if that's their marital home, or even if they own the home and their girlfriend is staying in it, but the girlfriend is the victim. And some of you may not like that, and I don't care.
Right.
That is us. That is me keeping the alleged victim, the survivor in that case, at least prior to a trial, safe. And the reason that I say so delicately that I don't care is because if I'm wrong in keeping that person away, it is completely outweighed by the risk of harm and the potential for death to occur.
Right.
While we're waiting for that potential acquittal or or conviction,
Yep.
if that's what happens in that case. Probation supervision and domestic violence track probation is one of the single biggest things that you can do for prevention purposes and the accountability piece in any court that you're in. I hope that courts throughout the United States will start looking at those cases in poor little tiny old misdemeanor court as being just as important as any felony conviction in the community that they're in. I don't care if it's a misdemeanor that only carries up to 93 days in jail. Why am I not sending them to jail for those 93 days? Like I mentioned you before, they learn nothing sitting in jail.
Right.
I have to
They sit there and stew and get more pissed.
And we're doing nothing to change the cognition, to change the behavior that caused them to come into the court case, that domestic violence situation to begin with.
Right.
And this is actually me having compassion right here. You're going to hear for a perpetrator of domestic violence, because maybe that young man was exposed to so many adverse childhood experiences and generational trauma that he didn't have a chance to engage in a healthy relationship. So we're going to give them the chance to learn. We're going to hold them accountable when they're not. And we're going to know that there's jail time that can be used as a punishment if they're not successful. But giving the 93 days upfront jail, you guys, I don't know if you realize this, but I can't even put them on probation if they accept their entire jail term.
Yeah.
I have had somebody come in before, and this is how ingrained basically just being a perpetrator was in this person's brain. Rather than sit through a probation that they knew they weren't going to complete and they didn't want to do, they said, give me my jail. And in the state of Michigan, you can request your entire jail sentence as you wish, and I cannot place you on probation.
So he would rather take 93 days in jail
than be put on probation for 12 months and made to do a batter's intervention program.
Have to do a program to get better.
Yeah.
That is someone who is not willing at all.
And at the end of the bond, those 93 days, when the bond condition's over, if they're not on probation, I can't continue a no contact. So the victim, the survivor's only potential to protect themselves is the civil piece of paper, the personal protection order. Now, if they walk through that, then yes, they could be charged with an aggravated stalking. That is a felony. These are additional charges they can accumulate. But this is assuming that the survivor has the willpower and has the services and has the safety planning and has the support to be able to follow through.
The wherewithal.
Yeah. Offender accountability, then that's that piece. And then survivor involvement throughout the entire process.
Yeah.
My goal now is that survivor involvement should not end at the date that they're sentenced, when they're allowed to stand up at the perpetrator's hearing, if they even feel comfortable doing that,
right,
and giving their statement about the worst day of their life again. So it's making court comfortable for them. Do they want to give their statement by proxy? Do they want the victim's advocate then to state it for them? Yeah. Do they want a letter read? Do they want to appear via Zoom instead of coming in person? And I'll do that. I will let them appear via Zoom with the camera off if they want, so they don't have to see anybody and so no one can see them, and they can put their story on.
Okay.
I want those voices to be heard. And at the very least, if you don't want it stated in open court, do you want me to review the letter and the sentencing material and the pre-sentence investigation? Because I don't have an opportunity to know any of that perspective until the sentencing, because it is not legally appropriate for me to know it.
Right.
But then to involve them so that we give them notice now of every review hearing that I'm going to have. And there's monthly review hearings if you're accused of a family violence offense. That is not just domestic violence, you guys. That is child abuse. That is stalking. That is a disorderly person that's been pled down knowing that it was from a family violence incident. All of those things I'm going to place people in my docket for, and I'm going to have them accountable. They're going to come in and see me, the judge, every month so that we can make sure that they're making progress.
Can we also mention the canine advocate that can sit with them?
Yeah, so I don't have a court advocate yet, but I can't wait to have a court canine advocate someday. The prosecuting attorney's office used to have, they have Jagger, but he's retired. Did you know that?
I did.
He's retired from the court
But
stuff.
I know that there's other courts that have them, so I just wanted to mention
if your court is lucky enough to have a canine advocate for people, I trust me that it's one of the things that's on my list that I'm looking into. My domestic violence case manager, who was part of my grant, she's my part-time person. She is very specifically, and she's our friend friend, Heather, who's a Patreon, by the way. She is looking into that for me. But what she does is she is the individual now who I have communicating with the survivor and with domestic violence shelter and with the prosecuting attorney's office advocate, because they have a victim's advocate too, who's there to do a different job. And it's an important one, and it's to prepare them for trial and to walk them through that part of the system. So all of these people having communication now and trying to make the process more friendly towards survivors is what the goal is. There will be victims. There will be survivors who do not like me and how I'm handling the situation, or that I'm refusing to lift an order.
Absolutely.
Okay.
Yep.
I understand. I'm also happy to be the bad guy every single time. If it means that I don't lose somebody, if it means that nobody dies or is injured during my cases.
Sure.
And this is because let's talk children. We know that children are affected by domestic violence. I tell everybody this and they are shocked. They are at more risk of having issues because of these ACEs, these adverse childhood experiences, like being exposed, growing up witnessing domestic violence, than substance use in the home. At more risk of how things are going to happen with them growing up into their health than if they grew up with a parent who's addicted to a substance. Yep. Equally as bad, often co-occurring. But children who grow up witnessing domestic violence are being frequently exposed to any types of those behaviors in the home. It not only predisposes children to numerous social and physical problems, but it also teaches them that violence and coercive behaviors is a normal way of life, therefore increasing their risk of becoming society's next generation of both abusers and victims. And that was taken directly from the Office on Violence Against Women's website. Children will experience depression, anxiety, embarrassment, and if exposed to violence for extended periods of time, ambivalence.
Yes.
It becomes normal. Yep. You have interviewed children before who it is just so normal and regular, and you just gave us an example of even like one of your children's friends, like, what do you mean you don't scream at each other and hit each other or whatever? Like, that is just not normal for them. Their normal is to deal with mom and dad screaming at each other after you go to bed at night.
Yep.
If you're lucky, if it's not happening in front of you while you're awake, because there are still perpetrators and survivors out there, true victims, who think that if the kids don't see it happening, that they're unaware then and therefore not affected. Listen, if your kids are in the home, it's happening and they're being affected.
I recently had a childcare case where 2 caregivers got into a domestically violent situation. And
at a daycare. How
How
pissed would you be as a parent knowing that the people who you trusted to provide care for your kid are having a knockdown, drag out, screaming, using obscenities in front of your kid? You'd be pissed.
Someone was arrested, but even the parents themselves, I want you all to hear this. During the investigation, when we interviewed the parents, they all said, we have no concern for these caregivers because my children didn't witness it. And to which I said, wow. So if this was a situation of a drug deal and your kids didn't witness it, would it have been okay for them to deal drugs
there's meth in the house?
In the basement of the house while your kids were upstairs?
Well,
No. So why was it okay that they were choking each other in the basement of the home while your children were upstairs watching TV?
Well, they don't.
It was not.
No, and I don't blame the people who don't know that.
No.
You have to educate yourself. Instead of dealing meth, they were dealing trauma. They're trauma dealers.
Yes.
Perpetrators and aggressors are trauma dealers. That is what they are dealing to the next generation of their children and our children in those type of situations. Children are going to act out. And we see children acting in violent ways. They can often be attributed to things that they've seen or to domestic violence, family violence being perpetrated on them. These are kids who I call on, how many teachers in the audience here? And, a ton of them, right? Raise their hand. And these are people who can tell you, probably by name, which students are being abused or witnessing domestic family violence at home. You can tell.
Absolutely.
You know which, if you're an expert in the field, you know. And to those of you out there that are experiencing family violence at home, your kids' teachers know.
Yeah.
People know it's happening. And if you are able to reach out for help or willing to be helped, there are people who should have your side, who should have your back. So how are we going to empower survivors of family violence? Our goal At some point, my goal, my dream is to have every county, every community have a coordinated community response team, a true CCRT, where you have members from law enforcement, EMS, your hospital, prosecution, your court systems, mental health and service providers, and you, the general citizens who are involved, clergy.
Yes.
You know, spiritual violence, we talked about that. I might have named it briefly. If I didn't, I forgot. That is a real thing. People who are guilted into not reporting because it would break up the family and God.
You're going to go to hell.
Yeah, you're going to go to hell.
We can't get divorced. It's a sin.
Absolutely. Mm-hmm. Bystanders, in terms of how to respond, just a little bit words of encouragement. So if the family violence isn't occurring directly in front of you and it's maybe disclosed to you by someone, listen. Mm-hmm. If they're telling you about something that's happening at home and you're recognizing that this is family violence and they don't, they're just using you to vent to because you're safe, listen to them. Don't judge them. Do not even be judgmental. Don't argue with them. Don't pry and ask additional questions. Let them talk to you. Mm-hmm. And then you encourage them to report. You offer to go with them, you hold their hand, or you find someone who can help them through the process if you are not comfortable. Yep. So if your friend comes to you and she starts telling you something and it is feeling wrong about what's happening in her home, it is okay for you to say, Mary, that's not okay. It is not okay what you're telling me has happened. You don't deserve that. The kids don't deserve that. What can I do to help? Can I help you report this? There are people that will help you, and then offer to be there. And if you can't be there, because not everyone can do that.
Yep. Not everyone has the capacity to.
Then find someone who can.
Yeah.
If you are observing violence, you have to question, is it safe to intervene? If it's not, you call 911 immediately from where you are. And frankly, if domestic violence or family violence is reported to you, there is no reason that you can't report that to 911 or even Child Protective Services if you have to, from where you are, and wait for law enforcement to respond.
And those are the most dangerous calls for law enforcement and for Child Protective Services
Absolutely.
To respond to.
Yes. If you decide it's safe to intervene, some examples, you can try to create a distraction in an indirect and non-confrontational manner. Think of a situation where you are at the grocery store, in the parking lot, and you see somebody being domestically violent in that area. And you can think of something like, oh my gosh, my car won't start. Can you please help me? Or your car's being towed away if they're inside the store and maybe they'll run out. Or you can just be direct. And I'm a direct person. I think you are too, but some people are very uncomfortable with this. Are you okay? Do you want me to stay with you? Or ma'am, what I saw happening was not okay. Can I please stay with you and see if I can get you help? Or you delegate. If you are seeing this and you are uncomfortable and you're an introvert and you are not somebody who's going to involve yourself in a situation, or it's not safe to involve yourself in that situation, like it's actively happening, okay? Call 911 or go get someone to help. Go delegate. Go find the security guard. Right. Go find somebody who's working the greeter at the front of the mire and say, there is a woman getting the crap beat out of her out here and I've called 911. Tell someone.
Right.
If your loved one is being abused, be supportive. Help them get to safety. Call domestic harmony. Do not blame them or ask them what they did.
Yes, that is
the
worst.
Do not ask anyone what they did to deserve what was happening. Family violence affects the entire community. Family violence prevention, though, builds stronger children, and appropriately funded, trained, and staffed systems keeps our community safe. But none of that can happen without you guys, without the general public knowing and learning more about family violence. Yes. And again, I want to say that I 100% agree with the criminal process and with a person who is accused of family violence having the right to all of their rights as as U.S. citizens. And so all of the cases that I have referred to today are cases where the person has either pled to or been found guilty of offenses. And any of the prevention information I'm giving you, you should utilize. I mean, interpret that however you will. I feel like I'm just giving information. My sources, nomore.org, Prevent Connect, the DOJ Office on Violence Against Women, and the National Domestic Violence Hotline. And all of the rest of the sources that I would have are basically from my own brain through cases from our local domestic harmony and from other community members here who we love.
Yes.
Who care about us. So
perfect. Thank you so much. I think that this will resonate with a lot of people. I think it was very informative. And there's a lot of a lot of things to consider that I don't think, again, because of the generational piece, that we always consider to be domestic violence. A lot of people consider domestic violence simply to be someone hitting another
Someone
person.
who beats their wife.
Yes.
That's just the picture you get.
It is. That's really just the tip of the iceberg. There's so many other caveats to it and ways to abuse somebody that's considered family violence. So just be more aware. This is like the more you know PBS special here, but I like it.
I want to, one other thing I want to add, and I think there's a lot of you out there who will be like, well, what can I do to help? And this happens every time I give this talk. If you have a domestic violence shelter and they have a board, join it.
Yeah.
Of course, the educate yourself piece, but I'm talking about like active efforts of what to do. In my opinion, every community through their domestic violence shelter or some type of organization, they need a list of landlords, of people who have housing available, that when they aren't appropriate for the shelter or the shelters run out of room, those are people who are willing to rent to survivors, families of domestic or family violence.
Yep.
I also think it would be super important if you have an animal shelter or a list of individuals who are willing to foster animals from people who are involved in a domestically violent situation, so that when they go to the shelter and the shelter cannot take pets, there's a list of people that they can call who are like, we would lovingly take your cat in. We will lovingly take your dog in while you're working through this process until you find an appropriate place. Those are two really quick and easy things that you can do. And reach out to your communities, to your shelters, and say, hey, I'm a person who loves pets, and I would happily take in a pet for a person who's being abused in their family so that they can get through this process. Just little things.
Yes.
Little things to do.
Love that.
Are you going to bathe us?
You're welcome. I am going to bathe us, but thank you very much for that. And hopefully everybody learned a lot today. This is very, very informative. And you should know, before we started recording, Megan was like, well, this is going to feel weird because you know all of these things and you work all these things. I'm like, you're not talking to me, Megan. You are talking to the public. And this is good information for those who aren't in our field, that don't see this every day, work through this every day. And so, yes. And feel free to encourage people to listen to this that you think maybe need to hear a message, but you're uncomfortable with trying to bring that to them.
Do you know how much I would love to be okay, but just listen to this.
Yes.
Your friend comes to disclose something and she's like, no, everything will be fine. And you're like, okay, but listen. So there's this podcast with these two crazy chicks and I just want you to listen.
Yeah. I just want you to listen to this episode and then let's have this conversation again. Can you just listen to that? That's all I ask.
For sure.
Yeah. So please share widely.
Are you going to give me a dumb criminal to bathe all of our brains today?
I'm going
Can it not be assaultive?
It's not.
Okay.
It's seriously stupid social media.
Oh, this.
Yeah. It's criminals on social media.
I love these.
Oh, yes.
As if the police don't follow the Facebook.
Yep. I love it when people just can't help their selfie game.
Oh.
They just have to have that selfie no matter what criminal activity they may be participating in.
Is this a Florida man?
Oh, this is not actually the first one I have is how about this guy in Australia who was unhappy with his mugshot picture. So
they did me dirty.
Yeah.
They took it from the left side.
I would hate that. Everyone knows my left side is where
I don't like my right side.
My left side's where my nose looks bigger. I'm sorry. I don't. Honestly, I don't love any of my angles, but Australian police posted a wanted poster on their Facebook page for a man, only to have him comment on their post requesting that they use a better photo of him. Yeah. And wouldn't you know it, then they were able to pinpoint his location and go ahead and arrest him.
It's almost like they're trained investigators. It's weird.
Oh, it's weird. How about this one? How about a thief that posts a selfie eating stolen cash? I said it. I said eating.
He's like, I'm destroying the evidence. I'm going to eat these Benjamins.
I am. Benny tastes good today. Okay, so.
Were you going to try to say his name?
No, no. I was just more like, where do we start with this? This is like a quote straight out of this book, Seriously Stupid Criminals by Sainova Cantrell. She says, okay, how many times does it need to be said? Do not post pictures of yourself on Facebook with your stolen cash. Seriously. I have found so many types of stories that I've excluded most of them. This one has a couple of elements that make it unusual, so I decided to include it. A young couple from Ohio decided to rob a bank, but the man has multiple face tattoos, which is never a good idea when you're in the business of theft. His girlfriend at least takes a few minutes to apply several coats of makeup to his face, trying to cover the tattoos. Then, after donning a black hooded jacket, he robs the bank and walks away unscathed. This should be the end of the tale. But then, of course, it wouldn't be included in this narrative.
Well, the number of people that forget or can't afford face masks is large.
It's a lot.
It's a lot.
And want to rob banks. The couple proceeded to post pictures of themselves with the cash on Facebook. One disturbing picture is a selfie of the man sticking a wad of cash in his mouth. That grosses me out
So
for
dirty.
so many levels.
It's so dirty.
Cash is like one of the dirtiest things you could possibly touch next to, I don't know, the bottom of your shoe. You might as well lick the bottom of your shoe
100%.
where everyone has been walking on this nasty floors.
The urban legend
You
that
would be better off licking somebody's butthole.
yeah, it'd be
cleaner.
similar. It would be similar because the urban legend about how like however much cash has this much illegal drugs or cocaine or whatever on it, it's not necessarily untrue, but it is far more likely to be covered in fecal matter.
Of course. Of course.
Like people are gross.
People put this stuff in places that you don't want in your mouth, you guys.
I know. Every single person in the world that doesn't wash their hands after using the restroom and then pays with cash.
Touches their cash.
Just think about it.
Scratches their butt. Oh my gosh, on our Brain Bath Only episode.
The lady that
The
had her
cringy
hands
things
or
that
his
couples do.
We don't, Trust me. We're just saying it was cringy enough that person touched your cash. You should listen to it.
Yeah. You don't want that couple who
No.
liked to touch each other's bum regions deeply. Yeah, you don't want their hands on your cash then in your mouth. Oh my Lord. Then I'm going to end on this one.
Okay.
I actually am just shocked that this is a real thing. 2 women get into a drunken brawl and one ends up murdered. Okay?
What?
Police tie the other woman, to the murder weapon when they see her post a picture of herself, not only with the murder weapon, but with the victim bragging about how she had killed her.
Oh my God.
Posted it to social media.
She took a selfie with her murder victim
and the weapon.
weapon?
Yes, that is what I'm telling you. As if Facebook is such a private place to be posting these
Like
things.
law enforcement's not going to find this. No one's going to report
God.
it. She thought Facebook was Fight Club.
Yes, and that, the first rule is that we don't talk about what's on
Fight Club.
Fight Club.
We don't talk about what's on Facebook. Are you kidding me?
Oh.
I don't even follow all the crap that's posted on the social media sites. I can't. Not for my own mental health.
No,
and
me neither.
stability.
I really just use it to engage with our in our Patreon Facebook group. That's really all I use it for
reals,
anymore.
I do the same, and to see what people I love's kids are doing and how and to say happy birthday.
Yep, me too. That's the grandma version of Facebook.
Yeah, that's us.
How you use it.
Yeah, we're the grandmas.
We are, because that's all I use it for. And speaking of that, if you guys would like more of us, feel free to join Patreon. There's the link there. We had quite a fun brain bath or bonus episode month. A lot of our bonus episodes, we got a lot of good positive feedback on this month. People were very pleased with the content we created. But yeah, so it's there. We're here. We're not going anywhere. So feel free to join that. Binge watch. I meant binge listen.
Binge watch, binge listen, just don't binge drink. There's your advice for the day.
Exactly. Thank you, Judge. I appreciate that.
You're welcome.
And now we'll dismiss court here and
court
say
adjourned.
Once again, thank you so much for your wonderful speech today.
Thank you.
And we hope that you keep it curious.
And keep listening.
Until next time.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.